Hi, I'm Sri Bhargav, and welcome to Montage of Singapore Season 2, presented by Masti Media Network and supported by the National Integration Council. Today's episode is titled Beyond Profits, Singapore's Corporate Tapestry. And we will be diving deep into equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how that work within the corporate world can support national integration across communities in Singapore. Now, my panelists are all successful business diversity champions who have not only embraced inclusion within the workplace, but also demonstrated that that inclusion can lead to successful businesses. So, let's meet our panelists. Priyal Kamath is a passionate advocate for equality and inclusivity in Singapore. Now a PR, she is a senior vice president in a large MNC working on a beauty care business. Kanchana Gupta is the founder of vlookup.ai, a pro bono global mentoring platform for women. She's also a visual artist with multiple exhibitions in Singapore and abroad, having completed an MFA from LaSalle College of the Arts. Priyal Sharma is currently the regional managing director for an American MNC. She's a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and recently received the AmCham Equality Champion Award presented by DPM Lawrence Wong for her work in this space. Ravi Agarwal is a self-employed coach and facilitator for business agility transformations. He coaches leaders and individuals on improving working relationships with their teams and across the wider organization. And with that, let's get to it. I'm in the studio with my fantastic guests, and I know what you're thinking: equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we're all Indian. Well, let me assure you, my panelists here have extensive experience in working in the equity, diversity, and inclusion realms within corporate structures, and they are the perfect people here to give us an insight on that. Also, from my understanding, everyone's a PR here too, some of us working on getting our citizenship, so that will give us some insight too in terms of integrating into Singapore as well. So let us begin. Equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now guys, do you all have a moment in your life, a little story, in which you felt, you know what, I feel there's an importance for more inclusion, or I want more inclusion? What was that for you? Anyone would like to begin? Let's start with Ravi.
Okay, great question. She might not like me for telling this story, but it's a fun story. I was maybe 6 years old, sitting on the sofa with my mother, and for some reason she was sad, and she said, you know, you're lucky you've been born a boy, because it's a man's world.
She said that at 6?
Ish, yes.
So what went through your mind at 6 years old?
So I'm thinking to myself, oh great, I'm the right gender. And then I immediately thought, what about everybody else?
Well, good on you.
Yeah, but I was only 6 years old, so I didn't take any action.
Oh my.
But I look back in time and I look to try and connect threads, and there's lots of adult experiences as well. But that's the first time somebody told me that maybe the world isn't fair.
That's very insightful. Anyone else? A little story?
So I'll just, why I thought of doing something in the space of diversity, especially diversity and gender diversity. So many years back, I remember my first pregnancy, and I was working for an organization, not in Singapore. And I knew that it was performance management time, and I knew that I was in promotion list. But as soon as I broke the news that I'm pregnant, I was dropped. And that experience, I am no longer with that organization, and life moved on. But that experience somehow stayed with me, and I asked them that why I was dropped, and I was told that they were not sure if I'll come back after having a baby. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with what I have performed over the year.
Yeah.
So that stayed with me, and but at that point, I didn't take any action. But many years down the line, I decided to do something in that space and to create a platform that creates that access and inclusion more for women at different stages of their biological cycle and career.
Thank you, Kanchana. How about you, Priya?
Yeah, so I have a interesting way into this as well. I've actually, fun fact, lived in 23 different places growing up.
23 countries?
23, not countries, but different places.
Okay.
You know, even within India, there's a lot of diversity.
Yes.
So many cities across India, also many countries. So lived in the US, lived in China, Hong Kong, Singapore, many countries as well, right? And what that means is that I was used to being an outsider very often growing up. And being the new kid is not all fun. especially if people tend to view new people with suspicion, especially if you look different, if you speak differently, if you have a different lunch box that you bring to the class, and everyone's
Yeah.
like, okay, what are you eating, right? It's a very alienating feeling, and
Yeah.
there is a core of humanity that pulls us all together, but there are these surface level
The little
diversities,
things.
yeah, which actually pull us apart. So from a very young age, I was aware of this desire to need to fit in,
To belong.
to belong.
Yes.
And I guess that's where the first awareness started. Around then, if there is someone else new, how can I make them feel more included?
Right.
How can I make them feel more comfortable?
Okay, we'll get to that very quickly. Priyal.
Priya just told my story.
Ah.
Because I grew up going to 7 different schools, and I thought I had the record, but clearly, that's you beat me to
You
it.
see, the corporate folks are always so competitive.
Indeed. But I think now I'm going to build on that, because my, one of the last schools I went to was an international school in
Yes.
Paris, and I moved to it skipping a grade of school. So I went from grade 6 to grade 8 into the teeth of middle school, which is a fierce place in the best of times, right? And I went as this girl who had come from a very conventional convent school in Delhi, and going to an international school where the codes of what it meant to be cool were completely different, and I didn't know that. So when I was in Delhi, I was house captain, putting my hand up for everything, teacher's pet, and that made me really popular. My son now listens to this story and laughs his head off, okay? But I went to Paris and I reapplied that playbook, and it didn't work at all. I was so unpopular and so miserable. And that's when I realized, there was a part of it which was on me, which was how do I understand the cues of a new culture and assimilate into it, but also about how alienating it feels to be on the outside, right? So you're either in the house or you're out of the house, and I was clearly out of the house. And it took a while for me to figure things out. It also took some kind people, and at that time it felt like it was just a handful to let me in.
Right.
But that year really changed my personality and my perception and my value system of what it means to be different, and how that can be a good thing at times, but also can be a challenge.
This is fantastic. Now, equity, diversity, and inclusion is always something we're like, oh, it's a new buzzword, it's coming up now, but these are formative experiences. This is something we experience from a young age. So I want to play a little game, okay? We've talked about how we've gotten into this space, but let's play a little game. It's going to be called Word Cloud. Okay, so I'm going to say something, and I want you to speak up the first 1 to 3 words that come to your mind, okay? We want, the phrase is, creating an inclusive environment. Go.
Hard work.
Hard work. Come on.
Flexibility.
Flexibility.
Curiosity.
Everyone's invited.
Ooh, 2 words. Nice. Okay. Any more?
Necessary.
Tokenism.
Tokenism. It's necessary. What else comes to mind? In creating an inclusive space involving diversity, how do we tackle that?
Starts with respect.
Respect. So now we're getting all these different words. It seems to be a very complex topic. And diversity also can be in a range of experiences. It's not just being an outsider in one way, where there's ethnicity or gender. There are a whole spectrum of areas in which we can be more diverse. So how would you go about tackling this in the workspace? What are some challenges and what are some solutions? Kanchana, do you have anything that comes to mind when it comes to this?
I think, there are many challenges. I think one of the key challenge I feel is unconscious bias. Sometimes we feel that, okay, we champion it, but it's important to examine our own biases. And I've seen that many a time decision-making gets clouded by these unconscious biases. So how clear the leadership is about these unconscious biases. Equitable policies and processes, definitely. Also giving a representation in decision making. Sometimes it becomes a number game, but if you look at it, there's no representation in decision making. So to me, these are the 3 key challenges which I feel come into the way of achieving real inclusion and diversity and equity. And to me, the 2 areas which I would like to focus personally is one is that equitable processes and policies, so that people can challenge and have an equal voice to be heard.
Yeah.
in terms of any discrimination happening. And second, which is always my favorite and which is more focused on gender diversity, is flexibility. We can retain and engage a lot more women in workforce if we adopt flexibility and just let go of the mindset that the work is 5 days, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 8 hours. No. So those are my two areas.
5 hours a day would have been great, huh?
5 days a week, 8 hours minimum these days.
Yes.
It could be 12 hours a day too.
I want to dive a bit deeper into this idea of unconscious bias. Could any one of you explain to me what is unconscious bias?
Sure. I think it's a very base human instinct. It's actually an animal instinct that we are suspicious of anything different than us. And it is actually what used to help the caveman survive, right? That inbuilt kind of hardwired suspicion. And therefore, it takes deliberation. It takes an intentionality to rise above that. Because the instinct is that when you see someone different than you, you're suspicious, or you think that this person's not my friend, is not like me, right? So you have to be intentional to be able to recognize that, to the point that Kanchana was making, and to pause and say, okay, I can see there is surface level differences. Can I try to find some common ground, right? It's actually a very base instinct.
Yeah, I want to simplify things a bit further. Ravi and Priyal, do you have an example of what unconscious bias could even look like?
Gosh, yes. So, I mean, one of the things that changed me in this subject is, it's to your story. A woman got promoted during her maternity leave. Now, this is a really nice environment. And years ago, I saw this and I thought, hang on a minute, she's only worked for around 8 months. And the man has worked for 12 months. You're telling me she's better than the man in 8 months? Now, this is an unconscious bias. I'm very educated, but nobody educated me for this. Because who's going to get pregnant in a society? Right? Not the men. Right?
Never.
Right, never. So if you say, I can't promote you because you got pregnant during the assessment period, you're never going to get promoted.
Yeah.
And that was an unconscious bias. And it was years later I realized my bias. Years,
Wow.
not minutes. I didn't say anything at the time, but it was real waking up to why we need these kinds of policies in our corporates. Because otherwise you've got people like me who have no idea. Incredible, right?
Let's try to dive it down even to a very simpler experience, on a day-to-day experience. What are some things that people in the corporate world can do or think about in order to reduce unconscious bias?
So I think, one of the very classical signs of unconscious bias that I've seen in organizations is when it comes to selection of people to work in a team. Either it's for the promotion or it's, being recruited into a new business unit or a new organization altogether. And at that time, very often when we provide the hiring manager options on who to take, you see a clear pattern of picking people like me, to borrow some of the words some of the others have talked about. And that doesn't, I don't think there is a negative intentionality over there, but that is where it starts.
Right.
And so it's just comfortable to work with people who are like our own selves, right? Because it just makes it makes things
familiar.
easier. It makes things easier. But I actually wanted to make a slightly different point here, which talks, links back to what you asked up front. Is why is this? Why do you do this? Why is it even important? And what can organizations do? My experience has been that if you just go sort of beating the drum of diversity and equality and inclusion, you'll only get so far. And often, and nowadays, in fact, you're seeing a backlash to it. So I think really getting into why it's important is when behavior starts to change, when unconscious bias starts to slip away. It's really understanding that this is not charity. This is not, I'm doing it because it feels good, but it really is great for businesses, which is the business of organizations, right? So as long as you can make that link very clear, I think the rest of it then just falls into place.
Okay, there's some exciting words there. Now for you, our lovely audience, if you have words too that have come to mind when we say inclusive work environment, comment down below as well. Okay, let's talk a bit about how we can reduce these biases at work, make workplace more conducive and inclusive. So how can we do this? Priya?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we have to think about all of us as human beings, as people, right? If we establish that we have more in common than we actually have uncommon. And we all have to kind of lead by example. We have to lead with our hearts, and we have to be open to recognizing that humanity in each other and to recognizing that we are actually more similar than apart. Yeah.
So I will suggest a few practical things. Singapore is just this multicultural melting pot. And most of our organizations, I work for an MNC, reflect that. So we're people with different nationalities, different languages. Make an effort, is what I would say, to ensure that we recognize and appreciate all these differences. So a few things that I like to try is ensuring that we organize a monthly lunch where the cuisine is from a different part. So that's a lot of fun. Everyone likes food. Food's a winner. So food's a great thing. And then just smaller things, like be conscious of the fact that you shouldn't be talking in a language that other people may not understand.
Right, yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that I find, just are practical and work.
Okay.
To me, in Singapore, one of the things I really enjoy is that, again, as Priyali said, that the melting pot of multicultures is trying to understand the stories behind each other's festivals. So I'll always would love to ask, for example, in my team, which is like lots of different nationalities, if a certain festival is coming, share with everyone what is the story behind it, how did it start, and it gives an immense sense of happiness to people to really share myths and stories behind different festivals, and I feel that is a very big connector.
This is lovely. So all of these little things, when they're done in a corporate environment, how does the corporate structure improve? Ravi?
Oh, in so many ways. Equal share of voice is a big thing. And I often think the best ideas are hiding in the crowd because people aren't speaking. So if we can get more inclusivity right, we can start to see some really innovative ideas coming out of the crowd. And then that starts improving motivation as well and engagement. And these are all good for business.
Yeah.
If I can just build on that, I work in marketing, and one of the things which I find really interesting is when you take someone from a foreign culture to observe consumers in a different culture, they pick up nuances which are so powerful and so insightful, which maybe someone from a home culture might just ignore because they are just like, isn't this so normal? Like, isn't this so obvious, right? And it just creates much better advertising campaigns. It creates much better product development because we have better understanding.
This is very interesting. So you're saying sometimes being different can just bring that other perspective, which we may not think about. So as PRs yourself, I'm sure you've worked internationally, you've had all that experience. What are some things we can learn in Singapore when it comes to especially creating a sense of national integration, bringing this equity, diversity, inclusion work into the community? What are some cultural things perhaps we can adopt?
Gosh, having people live together is a wonderful thing. You get people from different nationalities living together. And my father did something similar when he integrated in England. He went to a place where all the Caucasians live, rather than going to the place where all the Indians live. And that's something Singapore's done from the start.
We've already done that systematically.
Yeah.
But let's say on the individual level, what can I do as a foreigner to really come into the community and say, okay, how can I make this a more inclusive place? How can I, one, feel more included? Or what practices can I adapt as a local to make it more inclusive?
One of the things I find really fun is volunteering. So when I first moved to Singapore, I have to say I didn't cotton on to this early enough. But a few years later, I had my son, and now he's very into wildlife and into art. And so for the last few summers, he's been putting up his hand and saying, where can I, go and contribute? And ACRES is one of the charities that Singapore has, which is all about rescue of, endangered animals or illegal pet trade and that kind of stuff. He's never had more fun. And he has so many Singaporean friends. It is now just a lovely, lovely way for him to feel part of a community. So actually, through the eyes of my son, I have seen that volunteering is a great way to get in. I'd recommend it.
Available anywhere across the world with the app Radio Masti 24/7. The 24-hour station offers a vast variety of programs filled with local, global and Indian content along with Bollywood gossip and updates. Make sure you add Masti to your lives. Download the app today and stay energized and connected on the go. Radio Masti 24/7 Live, Singapore's only Bollywood radio since 2009.
Thank you, Priyali. How about you, Kanchana?
Shrey, I think when I moved to Singapore, my way of understanding the local culture was really get to know the art, theatre, heritage. And I started getting involved in that. I started going to art exhibitions, National Heritage Board, heritage walks and trails, and theatre, local theatre. And so much so that I loved it so much that I actually ended up joining an art school and becoming an artist. But that experience really exposed me to a very different side of Singapore, which was not corporate Singapore, which most expats get exposed to in the initial years, but people from different backgrounds, different cognitive abilities, different creative talents and energy.
Yeah.
And LaSalle was a great melting pot of that. So to me, that was my cornerstone of integrating into Singapore society.
I love that you said that. See, that's a plug for me, guys. Watch all my shows, come to all my theatre performances, and integrate into Singapore.
And my art shows too. Let's plug both.
Yes, your art shows as
We
well.
artists are shameless
Support
pluggers.
local artists. There we go. Okay, let's dial it back a little bit. Okay, now we're talking about Singapore. So, why does Singapore need equity, diversity, inclusion? And I want to get into the nitty gritty. What are some issues that you've observed in your work when it comes to equity, diversity, inclusion with the people you've met? What are some things that you've observed, Priya?
Sure. I think we're very blessed in Singapore where we have a very diverse set of people here anyway, right? So diversity is almost inherent in the places that we are. And that's where inclusivity and equity become really important.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that we're getting the best of everyone. You know, we were talking about earlier that diverse teams make better decisions. Diverse teams actually lead to better outcomes. They're collectively more intelligent.
But do you see in Singapore that though we might be culturally diverse, there's some struggle there in getting the best out of everyone? Or do you feel like it's not there?
No, I think that we do need to take action. We do need to be intentional about creating that space where everyone feels included. You know, there's naturally people's tendencies. Some speak more, some speak less. Some will be actively participating. Others have to be invited in. And just being aware of those differences and creating that space, you know, where we can let people interact. Let that magic happen. When you see that integration happen, that's the real magic.
So here's the thing, right? A lot of times the work with equity, diversity, and inclusion requires radical change, right? It requires acknowledging problems and then actually having action to have radical change. And sometimes I've observed, at least as a Singaporean growing up here, Singapore sometimes is resistant to radical change. It's sometimes, you know, you get those people saying, hey, please don't rock the boat, right? There's a sense of fear about that. Personally, you know, I auditioned for this movie 6 years ago. I was told to be more Indian, right? And that made headline news when I wrote about it. And people were telling me, you know, go back to India, you know, or, you know, you're not a professional actor if you couldn't do the accent and blah, blah, blah. Now, this can get a bit heavy, but at the same time, it took 6 years. But now, not a single audition I've been to have they ever told me, be more Indian. Right? But it's taken 6 years. At that time, it was different. Now it's different. Have you observed that in your work, where there's some resistance to change?
There's resistance to change, yeah. I mean, it's part of change. So we have to learn to get more comfortable with feeling a little bit uncomfortable around talking about the things that maybe aren't very pleasant. You know, I'm in a meeting and then I'm getting all these messages on the side saying, oh, I didn't agree with that. Why didn't you say something? Oh, you know, can't. You know, right. And it's that kind of thing. We all already know it, but we're not speaking about it. So if you don't make your voice heard, nobody knows what you think. Mm-hmm. And then the next time it's that much easier to keep quiet, right? And that's when we're losing out on the diversity.
Mm. Yeah. So, you know, my experience has been that there has to be a trigger, like your story of you wrote an article, you had a little drama, but now things have changed, right? I know this story about a plant. There was a manufacturing plant in which, you know, there were a few people who were disabled, physically disabled, so people with disabilities. And they started agitating, saying that the plant was not designed to really help people in wheelchairs, for example, go around the lines. And so after a little bit of this conversation, the plant decided to, you know, go ahead and refurbish and redesign some of the layout of the modules, etc. They started doing this only because they heard the story of these people in wheelchairs. But, you know, 6 months later, what ended up happening was the plant got designed in such a way that access and operations became so much easier for everybody.
Mm.
That productivity of the lines went up.
Right.
And then this became such a wonderful business story. So to answer the question of, is diversity even needed to begin with? I think absolutely yes, it's great for business. And this is a great example, right?
That's a great way to sell diversity, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's great for business because the production lines actually started producing a lot better,
Wonderful, yeah.
a lot more, because now it was easier for everyone.
It's always been great for
Yeah.
business. We just don't sell it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And that's the Singapore founding feeling as well. I need to bring diverse people together. So it's not separate from great for business. That's the silliness of it. If we can't work with each other, we don't have a business.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think, coming to the business point, and one of the areas I know Singapore is very focused on is innovation.
Mhm.
And the area where I think there's still a fair bit of space to place cognitive diversity. When we're talking about, we still think of diversity in a very traditional term of gender and all that stuff, physical ability, and all those are great areas. But how do we create space for people who have different way of thinking, different way of problem solving? How do we create space for people who, we are very polite as a society, but within that politeness, how do we also give space for people who can challenge different ways, traditional way of thinking? And I think that's where, to me, cognitive diversity, and how do we bring that and pull that different mental, problem solving abilities and way of thinking and give space. That is a very, very interesting factor. And most countries, not just Singapore today, most countries have to focus on that to get every kind of mental abilities and strength and energy pulled together to create magic.
I think you make such a great point, Kanchana, because, I was joking when I came in here earlier today that I never remember names, but I always remember numbers. So I'm sure I'm autistic. That's part of my introduction. I'm not, but I don't think I am. We're all on the spectrum. But anyway, that was the way I usually share an excuse for not remembering someone's name. But I digress, because the point I wanted to make was that people who are on the spectrum of autism often are very, very overdeveloped in other areas that are becoming so important to the work we do.
Yeah.
So in the age of AI, in the age of big data, we're actually seeing that there's a huge role for people on that side of the spectrum to contribute into businesses.
Because
right?
they have very specific ability beyond our own comprehension.
Indeed. So I actually think that's a wonderful plug for actually looking at the range of abilities out there and making sure that in the new world we actually have space for all of them.
I love this. So we talk a bit about innovation now, right? And ideation. So I want to do another little game. Okay. So how about we work together to ideate how can corporate businesses, companies, bring this equity, diversity, and inclusion work beyond the corporate world, right? How can we bring it outside? Are there ways to collaborate with organizations, NGOs, or individuals? Have you ever done work like that before, or do you have any ideas? Anyone's got anything?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things is that for organizations is to really understand the local communities, the place that they are, to understand the different types and different fabrics of the local community, not just in terms of like racial fabric or physical abilities or gender fabric, but again, I was talking about different kind of fabric, and how do we create equal opportunities for them? I think I'm very passionate about something called equal opportunity and access. How do we create access for them so that they all have access to leaders, role models, guides? And that creates a huge difference, because having access to a role model creates a different aspiration and ambition among many people. And that's the area I have taken up, where through my startup, VLOOKUP.ai, we are trying to create more and more access and equal opportunities for women at different stages of their career. So I feel organizations are doing a great job, but there's still a lot of white space which they can play.
So what could be some other types of collaborations? Any ideas? This doesn't even have to be something that exists now.
Sure.
Let's just play with the future.
So one of the things which I think is really nice is, to your point about communities, is because corporates are actually microcosms of the community that we live in, right? So the kind of behavior we role model, or the kind of behavior that we have there, how do we bring it out and actually include the communities in it? An organization I used to know used to have this very specific exercise where they would allow people to go have a community day. Okay. Where, you would go out into the community, you would serve people, you would, go play sports with kids, you would go and kind of visit the local art scene and be tour guides to folks who are coming in. It's a way of integrating into the community, celebrating our diversity and the vibrancy of our community, and really that cross-fertilization of ideas, of thoughts, of people. It would just create this really nice energy.
Love that.
And another thing we do, not many people are doing it in Singapore yet, but I want to see more of it, is to get leaders from different companies and industries talking to each other. Right. So we don't do enough of that. We're very insular in our leadership roles, and then we're scared of the competition. But we're also sometimes we've got individual relationships. Do it formally. Get those guys out to the tech startup from the crusty old organization that needs to learn to innovate a little bit, to meet your peers doing the similar kinds of things. And that's building community across Singapore and across different industries as well.
Yeah, and we see this kind of collaboration beyond the corporate structures. I mean, we look in the arts industries, there's always international collaboration or conversation, all via social media. There's all these collabs happening between influencers and content creators. I mean, we're always having this sense of synergy. And I'm wondering whether in the corporate world, is that lagging behind for some reason?
It's lacking. People feel they're going to lose out. I'm competing with you for a slice of the
so
share.
Competition is an old word. Now it's about collaboration.
Shri, you mentioned about art world and Ravi talked about corporate world. Just occurred to my mind that I see one area where there is a scope of integration is art ecosystem and corporate ecosystem. Somehow I feel both these ecosystems exist in silo in Singapore, and both have their own unique sets of skills and abilities. And how do we create a more appreciation and transfer of skills across these two? I occupy both spaces, and I really feel that we lose out on so much of potential because of this lack of integration.
I agree. I think that would be fantastic to see, because you have such diverse communities across the corporate world and the arts world, and that would be one really good way to form that integration within the society that we have today. Okay, now before we end off, I just want to ask one more question. This is just for Ravi and for Priya. Okay, we got your answers from Priyali and from Kanchana. This is mainly about, if I'm a foreigner coming into Singapore, what tip would you give them to integrate better?
What I did is I don't live in the place where the white guys live. I don't know if that sounds racist or not, but I'm in the middle of an area with lots of Malays, Chinese Singaporeans, and I absolutely love it. Right, and I choose where I live based upon convenience, location, transport. So think about what's useful for you. Don't just let a property agent steer you to their preferred zone, which may be the most expensive, by the way. Make your own choice.
No, that's a great one. And for me personally, I work for a food company. And the food scene in Singapore is just outstanding with the kind of food courts we have. You see the diversity, inclusivity, and equity in our food court, right? So I feel like that's a great way to explore and to make connections with the local culture, with the local food, and have some nice bites while you're at it. So I would say keep yourself open to all these great new culinary experiences that Singapore provides.
I love it. Food is always great. No one can fight with food. This has been a lovely conversation. We've really gone deep into how corporate structures work with equity, diversity, and inclusion, how we can perhaps borrow some of the things that have been done abroad to Singapore, and how we can work across communities, whether it's in the arts or in the corporate world, and really integrate that. And I think, it has gotten a little deeper because it is not an easy conversation to have. And sometimes we have to face the hard truths in order to get better, even though we may be resistant to change. So it has been lovely. Thank you all for being here. But before you go, we've got a special gift. Okay, first we have this lovely photo. Now it's not this exactly. Okay, it's going to be a beautiful photo of the Singapore skyline done up by our very own 9 studios, all framed up. This is just a stand-in. We're printing the better ones out for you. Okay, and a very special gift from a award-winning Singaporean startup. It's called Haldi.
Oh,
this is the world's first sugar-free turmeric mints. They come in many different flavors. You won't even taste the turmeric, but you get all the health benefits. And they don't stain your teeth. So each of you will be getting this lovely bag of haldi. Excited?
Yes.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. And to all our viewers at home, thank you so much for joining in, for watching Montage of Singapore Season 2, presented by Masti Media Network and supported by the National Integration Council. Now, if you are working in the corporate world and you want to really push for equity, diversity, and inclusion, don't just sit there and think about it. Do it. I will see you next time on Montage of Singapore. Whoa, where are you going? It's not over yet. At the end of every episode, we celebrate cultural diversity within the art and performance space. And today, we have Rishik, who will be singing a Mandarin song and then transitioning that into Tamil. So have a listen.
Na na